Ahead and start recording. Excellent. Mark is going to be leading the conversation today, along with Rob. We have Carly that'll be joining. We have Keith and who am I missing? Dan
Yeah.
Shearer. And with the FAA team, we have myself, Eric Saraki, Jim Logie, Dan Lucia, and Jeff Baumgardner. So we've got the whole team here. So without further ado, I'm going to turn off my camera for bandwidth, and Mark and team, take it away.
Hey, great. Thanks, everyone. Welcome to 2026. We're getting this series going. We started it a year ago, not knowing how it would go, and I really appreciate everyone showing interest in our content and the great feedback that I've gotten also during the last 12 months has been a lot of fun to see. So tonight, I try to pick topics that we don't necessarily get a lot of training around, and this one seemed to be one that I've personally run into saying, wow, I wonder how this is done and what are the best practices. So hopefully you find it informative. Always, if you're not in the Wings program, but if you're here, you probably are. It's a great program. I'm working on my advanced, and I think I'm in the second phase already. So please participate if you're not already participating. And then I found a couple of interesting pieces on FAA's talking about winter operations and airport operations. And contaminated runways in the environment is not normal. It's inherently hazardous, and we may not all get a lot of training around how to deal with it. Human factors are, the training experience definitely varies across the country, even in the Northeast where we see it all the time. The data creators, as we'll discuss later on, are not necessarily consistent putting data into the system, and the users are probably not used to interpreting the data that they get to see. In 2016, there was a major effort to improve the technology that the NAS system was using, but it's still, we won't call it not perfect, but it's better. But there are still things that we can learn about the nuances that we'll hear from some of the participants in this NAS that use it tonight. Um, in the reporting, definitely an opportunity for some of the content to be inconsistent. And again, us as users, pilots, because it's inconsistent when we look at something, we may not be applying it the same way that the person who's posting it is intended. So what are we going to talk about? Airport environment. So that's runway, taxiways, ramps, where to get data that helps us understand what's going on, what it means, and how do we have a good ADM process. What we won't go over are there's endless courses on icing forecast and icing encounters and how to get out of them. Um, we won't go over, unless there's a lot of interest at the end, how to pre-flight a plane that's been sitting out in the ice and the cold and the snow. We probably could do a whole session just on that. Um, so what are we going to try to change differently this year? We're really after everyone flying more, getting more pilots involved and volunteering as well as just flying in general and doing it more safely. So how are we going to do that? And we're also trying to raise awareness of all the volunteer-free services that are out there. We still find that awareness is probably the number one challenge. How are we going to do that? We're going to share our experiences and um, I think the feedback that I got last year was too much of me talking. So I'm going to try to make sure that we're bringing in people that have a really good perspective on things and make sure they have a chance to share their knowledge and their experiences as well. We are focusing, as I said before, on topics that are not typical of training. And we hope that you all can share examples of your experiences and again, especially those that are atypical, so that we can incorporate them during the year. Um, Also, if you have people that you think would be great panelists around a certain topic, please let me know. Um, and then AirVenture this year, we're going to be at AirVenture. Last year, I did 5 presentations. I determined that that was too many to have a normal experience at AirVenture, so I'll be doing 3. Air Carolines will have a pavilion on Boeing Plaza again, and we'll have 3 planes and a helicopter on display as well. So I'll be there for 10 days like last year and easy to find. So just to make sure that everyone knows about Air Care Alliance, we are a trade organization like a trade organization. We have about 60 members, and there's probably over 100 volunteer groups out there, spanning quite the range of services. And again, one of our main goals is to make people aware of all these free services. So if you're not already a volunteer, if you're interested in volunteering, please click on the link here. And want to let you know that in the Q&A, Carly will be posting a Google Doc that, and we'll start doing this for the rest of the year as well. We'll try to have a list of all the websites that we're referencing in the presentation in that Google Doc, and you'll be able to download it after the session and not have to take, furious notes or take too many pictures during the session. And again, what makes us happy? I mean, you may want to fly wolves, dogs, animals, people, veterans. There's many, many ways to have a compelling reason to fly. One of our more recent members is Flying Tails. They have a PBS series now evolving as well, and they're flying regular, animal rescue, but also uh, wild animal rescue. So great, great organization if you haven't heard of them already. And before I lose anybody during the session, I want to make sure that we get this in right away, and then we can come back to it during the presentation. Is FAA has put out some great resources and some guidance on what to do with contaminated runways. And if you have a contaminated runway rating, which we'll explain more later on, is in the medium area, it can, greatly impact your landing distance. So they have an example here of Midway, which sort of drove all the changes. When you may have remembered in 2016, there was a Southwest Airlines flight that went off the end of the runway. Um, and it was contaminated, and they had not allowed for the impact of that contamination. So here's some basic rules. So if it's braking level 3, they're saying that if you're in a reciprocating engine airplane, multiply your landing distance by 3.2. Uh, and if you're in a jet, you can see what the interesting impact is here, 2,500 up to 6,250. So these codes mean a lot, and you need to be able to be comfortable understanding what the codes mean, as well as the description of the actual contamination. So here's a more easy to read version of it. And this is my personal minimums. So if condition code is dry, good, 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 and good to medium, that's a no-brainer. But I'll do braking action 3s to airports that I know. If I'm going to an airport that I don't know how their rating, the quality of their rating system, I probably won't go if it's a 3, and I definitely won't go if it's a 2 or 1. And the rules changed that if they have a braking action of nil or 0, they should close the airport. So the system doesn't allow the airport to even report a NOTAM with braking action of 0. The airport's supposed to be closed. So we'll come back to this in more detail, but I just wanted to make sure everyone was getting focused early on into this. So again, Melanie had brief introductions. Melanie's a rock star here as well. Eric and Jim and Jeff, we just met here. Carly has been on the Air Carolines board for a while now and director at a very good organization, STEM Flights. Rob's active with Angel Flight East, Air Force retired. Thank you for your service. And a very active volunteer pilot. We'll introduce our panelists. Dan is with us. I'm not sure if any of you know about Barnes. May not be that well known across the country, but it's very well known in the Northeast. Impressive, impressive background related to airport operations and safety, and also working with the airlines and being a pilot as well. So I won't read all of this. I assume you all can read, but again, really appreciate him being able to participate. I participate in the Massachusetts Airport Managers Association events, and he's very active there as well. It's good to see it. And then Keith from Bedford, which is a very, very busy airport just outside of Boston. And it was great for Keith to offer to be on tonight as well. And the oldest aero club in the country, Aero Club of New England, he's very active with that as well. And they have great safety courses. So thanks again, Keith, for participating. Um, Thought I would right away give an example of, you'll see this mentioned a lot, and I just wanted to ground everyone in what we're talking about when we see runway condition reports. They're talking about three segments of the runway. So it's the touchdown zone, the middle, and the end. So that's why you're getting three numbers when you see runway condition reports. Um, and they'll also call out what type of contamination it is. So, slush in the touchdown zone, that means you're going to have a lot of resistance. Compact snow at the midpoint means it probably is rolling pretty well. Ice at the end means it'll be skating all over the place potentially. So it's very important to understand that it's talking in thirds of the runway. Uh, the taxiways and the ramps have separate NOTAMs. So during this, we're going to review a crash again because I think it's a good one that gives us an example of all the different types of NOTAMs. I'm not going to go into like I did last year where I'd have a scenario and I would go through the entire scenario end to end. Um, it's more important, I think, for us to discuss the content tonight. But this is how I go through evaluating whether I can make a flight in the winter. And it varies by the type of information that's available, the length of the runway. Um, and if we have time at the end, I'll go through what I did in each of these scenarios. And you can decide whether I did it correctly or whether I should be doing something differently. Um, but if not, I'll try to put out that information again on a Google Doc or something that we can push out to you. But the type of airport, the type of forecast available for that airport, whether the airport is monitored at night or not, because there could be weather overnight. And if it's not monitored, you wake up and you're doing an early morning flight and you have no up-to-date data on the condition of that airport. And then what kind of passenger needs are there? Are they in a wheelchair? Can they walk? Are they agile enough to walk on slippery ice out to the airplane, which can be a challenge in many rural airports? Um, what parts of the aviation data that's available am I using? NOTAMs, PIREPs, things can I call friends at the airport? And then even though I may be doing all that work a day or two or three in advance, how do I confirm it the day of the flight? Can I call an FBO? Do I trust the FBO people to give me the right data? Airport ops, are the airport ops people pilots? Are they, formally trained, that kind of thing? And then pre-flights, go, no go. What is happening? Is it really aligning with my personal minimums? And is my alternate still a viable alternate? En route, how do I get en route updates to make sure this landing's still going to work? And then during the approach, again, is it still meeting my personal minimums for winter? Is it stabilized? As you know, if you're, just a slight bit off in terms of being high or going fast, your landing distance goes up significantly. And if that runway is contaminated, it means that you're going to have compound factors, making it even harder to land in what you're used to landing in. And then after you land, how are you sharing the conditions that you just went through so someone else doesn't have to feel like they're experimenting while they're landing? And is it good? Is it safe enough for you to actually take off after you've gotten there? So again, these are 5 scenarios. Again, at the end, if we have time, we'll go through them, but you can see that some airports are not putting out any condition reports at all. It may just be because they're not monitored. Um, some are reporting things from the day before, but may not have an updated NOTAM the morning that you're flying, especially if you're leaving at 6:30 in the morning to leave for that airport. And then even when you do have accurate reporting, there may be environmental conditions that cause a temporary change in what you encounter once you get there. So there's many factors which are just not typical to normal good weather flying. So we're going to dive into a really short one I do want to check no questions so far. Nope. Good. So Um, this is a crash, and the main reason I have only one page on this one. very senior pilot, uh, decided to go to an airport in Montana and decided to land with the tailwind on a runway that they already knew was snow covered, but they didn't know how much the snow was there. They weren't able to get a detailed report from ops, and the ops people weren't pilots. So they were advised during their approach that there was a quarter inch of snow on the entire runway, but they still decided to land with the tailwind. Um, the town, even though they got federal money, had never bought a plow. So whatever snow was there may not have been a quarter inch packed. It may have been something else. Um, and there were no NOTAMs for this, indicating the runway condition. So this pilot decided to land, put on reversers and brakes weren't enough and went off the end of the runway. So again, an accident chain with multiple failure points during it. You would think that, maybe this pilot had never been scared by, braking not actually working the way it should have, or the reversers not working. But this was a very simple one where, pushing it and having that completion bias just isn't worth it. So we're going to spend a fair amount of our time tonight is on a crash that you may have heard about in 2019. The good news is there were really no serious injuries, but there are a number of things failed, and this prompted some changes in FAA content. So there was a a normal flight from Newark, New Jersey to upstate Maine and Presque Isle. And Presque Isle's pretty remote. It's an 8-hour drive to Boston. So it's a very common place for volunteer flights to happen. And usually we're only seeing one flight a day from a carrier and then some FedEx planes up there when you're up there as a volunteer. So there's not always a lot of PIREPs from other, available to you about any of the conditions. You're often just looking at the NOTAM and whatever their airport ops may be putting on to you. So in this particular case, captain monitoring was had enough hours, and they were used to flying into Presque Isle. And ILS-1 is the most used approach into that airport. The first officer, again, pretty well experienced, but did have a medical issue with and used a CPAP machine. And the day before this flight had some sleep deprivation, but decided still to fly. And he also was familiar with Presque Isle and had been in there just the week before. And the forecast was pretty much living up to Presque Isle's conditions, which was, restricted visibility. Originally, it had been forecast to be light snow, but it became moderate snow during the route, during the flight there. And freezing fog, I'm not sure how many people run into freezing fog, but it's an interesting experience. So continue on. So here's what the NOTAMs were for that particular day that we would be reading, which is very common for us to read. And Dan or Keith, I don't know if you would want to dive in and explain what these are.
Sure, I can jump in for a little bit. I'm sure you've seen a lot of these before. They start out with a NOTAM number that starts with the month and the number for that actual NOTAM that occurs in that month. And on the NOTAM text, for instance, the first one, runway 19, PAPI out of service, and it's got some start and end times, and the EST at the end is an estimated end time. Oftentimes you'll see that to give a pilot an opportunity to know when this might affect them if we don't know exactly when the NOTAM is going to be canceled. Moving down a little bit to aerodrome, airport closed except 10-minute PPR. And that 122.8 is the frequency that you would contact to get your prior permission approval. We do that a lot, especially during snow removal operations. It's an additional layer of safety for the snow crews so that we know and guarantee we're going to talk to you while we're on the runway so that we don't end up meeting on the runway together. There are some other requirements for snow removal, all surfaces, work in progress snow removal. It's another reminder to snow crews that we're out there, or rather a reminder to pilots that we're out there. And then you can see some runway closures, taxiway closures, and the field condition. For instance, runway 1, FICON 333, 100% half-inch dry snow observed at that date and time. And then that date and time is good for 24 hours unless we choose to make it more restrictive than that.
And what's typical, Keith, in terms of a time frame that it's applicable?
Sure. The NOTAM manager process that we use defaults to a 1 day. And if we need to change it, we will. But the reality is that we'll let that start and end time just be as is, because what's more important is the observation time. We want to let people know when we observed it. So when you look at that date and time, for instance, observed at 2019, March 4th at 0953 Zulu. If you're looking at this and it's 4 or 5 hours old, then you want to definitely start looking for additional information. That's the most important number that we feel that we're giving you as to how recent this information is.
Great. And is there anything in the system? Well, we'll go over the downgrade upgrade thing in a second. So it's common for Presque Isle to have runway 10 2-8 closed in the winter. And that's the next one. The next one I think is interesting to explain as well, if you or Dan want to take that.
Which one is that one?
The one where Taxiway FICON, it's third from the bottom.
Yeah, so we'll post NOTAM FICONs for both the runways and the taxiways. Our priority is going to be the runway conditions, of course, getting those updated as frequently as possible. Those do not show the RCAM score. It's going to be a descriptor of what the conditions are. You may see a braking action, the BA medium. So we'll be able to report a braking action based on how we as the operators out there are observing that space. So that provides you with a little more information because there is not a FICON score for taxiways.
Right. So I'm curious how each of you rank medium versus, poor.
Well, so some airports will have a continuous friction measurement device. Other ones will have a little more old school device that's you stomp the brakes and it measures how quickly you decelerate. And then some seat of the pants. You kind of learn what the feel is, and when you start seeing, you can kind of compare how does it feel to stop. We especially use the same vehicle over and over. How does it feel to stop on a 3? And then you go out there and it's like, it says 3. No, we're not stopping that well. This probably isn't. Sometimes the RCAM generalizes, so it's good, but it's not perfect. So we will check to make sure that we're getting what we expect to get, and that our numbers are reflecting. So we're providing the most accurate, or at least the most conservative number for pilots to expect.
And do you have one of the friction devices, or?
We do. We have the kind of middle grade Beaumont. So it's sits in the truck with us, and several times down each third, you go and stomp the brake at a certain speed and get a friction measurement, and that helps us confirm what we probably might already know just by the seat of our pants. But
if you've been flying a long time, you might remember Talpa ARC, when this whole system came out, that we used to issue NOTAMs with mu readings. And those mu readings, those coefficients of friction, that number is what came from these friction decelerometers that we have available in the truck. Like Dan, I have the Beaumont mechanical version in our operations vehicle, but they run the gamut from multi-$1,000 continuous friction monitoring equipment, electronic, what have you, and it basically tells you in a number range how fast you can stop. And all of these things were invented before ABS, before anti-skid, and it was just the best opinion from the airport operator, and you had to interpret that based upon your personal minimums and the performance of your airplane. So it's still an imperfect system, but we are offering the best, and at least in our perspective, the most conservative information that we can, so that we're not trying to scare you into being here. We want to make sure that you know what the real conditions are.
I
So,
think it might be interesting to note as well. You'll see a lot of fives and threes. You're not going to see many fours or twos, and if you see a one, you probably shouldn't be flying. But you're going to see a lot of fives and threes, and unfortunately, that kind of generalizes a lot of the conditions. And there's a big differences between fives, fours, threes, and twos. And unfortunately, to your point, your minimum of if it's three, I might not go. A lot of conditions immediately get you to a three. It doesn't take a lot.
And there's
yeah, and that,
other nuances as well that are hard to interpret. If we had ice, but it was patchy, you're still going to see ones. And if an airport also were to add sand or a de-icing chemical to that surface, and the braking action was actually good, you still have to post ones as your FICON. So it's oftentimes misleading. And certain flight crews, if their FOMs say you will not fly in a one, then that pilot can't go, even though everyone else is flying saying that the braking action's good.
And it's interesting how it takes those jumps from you have to have 25% to get a FICON score. So some people may wonder, why am I not seeing a FICON score? Because we're not at 25%. But the moment you go over 25%, you could quickly get to ones. And to your point, it could be very good. You may have ice down the sides or a patch here and there, but overall the runway's in really good shape. But you hit that 25% or 30%, and now you've notched down quite a bit.
right. And that, just to be clear, it's 25% of the total runway.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
So that 25% can be all over the place too. It could all be at the far end. It could be all at the beginning. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So if we were looking at the taxiway FICONs, I've seen so many variations in there. Not sure how would you code snow over ice?
So you can either be patchy or fully covered, and there is a specific drop-down selection for whether it's wet snow or dry snow over ice.
Right.
And we can put it, I believe we might even have the option to do over patchy ice.
Yeah, the main reason I'm asking is I went into one of the airports, and I won't say which one, so I don't want to get ops in trouble or anything. And there was no FICON for the taxiway or the ramp. And I pulled off the taxiway into the ramp. And this is an airport that doesn't marshal you in. And my plane looked like I was trying to do a Tokyo drift. It just kept going sideways and sideways and sideways. So I was perpendicular to the normal parking slot because it luckily stopped. And they came out with the truck to fuel me, and I was expecting the truck to run into me, but it stopped. But the driver got out of the truck, took one step, flipped in the air, and landed on his head. So none of that, it didn't look like anyone was reporting anything even internally. So I'm not sure how the ramp areas are graded as well. And when you're transitioning from the taxiway to the ramp, here it's the apron. Are you guys spending as much time trying to figure that out as well? Or
It's done the same way as the taxiways. Again, it may not be as regular. It should be. And something I wanted to point out is not every airport's staffed all day long. So you mentioned,
right.
If you're coming in early in the morning, they may not have been there overnight. There may have been some wet pavement the night before, and then we get a cold snap overnight. And by the time you fly in the morning, it's ice, and they haven't shown up yet to do the operations check.
Right.
Make sure you're checking the chart supplements. A lot of people, it's hard to get people to look at the NOTAMs, but it's even harder to look at the chart supplements, and there's good information in there about what to expect, what services to expect.
Right. I think there are sometimes NOTAMs that will say when it's not monitored.
That is ad hoc, yeah.
Yeah, but it's ad hoc, and we have that later in the presentation here. But especially in the rural airports, so some of the better ones are publishing that they're not there from 6 p.m. to 7 a.m. So
that'll
if
be
you're if you take off at 6:30 a.m. on the way to that airport, you're not going to have much data um, that's current, at least. And even some of the major airports, the data that you're getting may not be fully vetted yet. And that's in the 5 examples that I provided earlier. Those airports are examples of you can have a very big surprise once you get there. Just have to decide what you're up for trying. So in this particular situation, this is what this flight crew would have been seeing. And this would have been pretty typical for what you see going into Presque Isle. I'm not sure at Pittsfield, Dan, you're at Pittsfield, which is not towered like Presque Isle is.
Yes.
Would this be sort of typical to what you guys would be putting out around the same time of day, or would you be doing
We
it?
would try to clear off. I mean, a half inch is getting to that point where we can plow. We don't have. Sorry, I say we have recently from Pittsfield, but Pittsfield didn't have plows. Or sorry, didn't have sweepers, so it was strictly plowing. So you have to kind of wait till you get to an accumulation amount that you're not going to compact it. You can't scrape off less than an eighth. So a half inch, we'd probably start looking at plowing unless we were looking at a band coming in. So that could be mid-storm, something to consider. Is it actively snowing? It's not uncommon to have a half inch, especially if we're looking at it drying or warming up and melting throughout the day. It may cause more issues to try to plow it and create berms.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense. I've been at airports like Burlington, which have huge sweepers, and you see them going out. But then you get onto the apron and you kill yourself because no one's bothered to clear it. So, and it can be very bad for your passengers, especially if they're elderly or they're undergoing any kind of treatment or in a wheelchair, trying to get them to get out to the airplane without having an accident. So, knock on wood, I've been fortunate over the years to survive, but there's been some near misses. So I think this gives you a good example of what this crew is seeing and that they're used to landing on this kind of stuff, that 333s were tolerable. I'm probably guessing that anything under a 3, their operations would not allow them to go in. And you're right, I don't remember seeing any 4s ever. I've only seen, and never any 6s. I've seen 5s, 3s, and before the change, I saw a nil or heard a nil over the radio.
Yeah, you won't see a 0 because we will close the runway. We don't have to close the whole airport. We have to close the surface.
The surface, right.
But you will see 6s occasionally. I found it interesting. The AC for the RCAM, we are not allowed to post a NOTAM for a dry runway, which would be 6s, which may cause some confusion. You mentioned earlier, well, it's been a day or two since the storm, but there's no FICON. Well, we're not allowed to post a FICON.
Right.
So you won't see it because it's implied that it's good. Unfortunately, there's no way for us to confirm that.
And that's where some of the airports'
Yes.
best judgment comes in about whether it should be reported or not.
Well, it is tough when you're right after a storm and you've got it clear and it's dry, but everybody's expecting that there's some contamination. So you want to communicate something that it's not, that we're not out there working on it. It's just a gray area of we would love to put something to say, yeah, it's clear. But we're not allowed to say that it's fully plowed and dry.
Right. But I've been in rural Maine and rural New York where they put out that everything's fine and you get there and every 20 feet there's 30 feet of snow and ice in the way. So braking is challenging. So yeah, so all of this can be quite subjective depending on the airport. And my personal experience, I've gone into Presque Isle now for more than 15 years all year round. And I won't say which airport this was, but I was in a taxiway waiting to take off, and they had been reporting that everything was 333. And this particular airport has a slight slope to it. And I heard ops coming, and they wanted to get in front of me. So they were coming in perpendicular, and I see them slam on the brakes and slide like 10 feet, more than 10 feet. And then I said, "Oh, how's the braking?" And they said, "Good." I said, okay, I don't think that would have been my interpretation of good. And I'm sure that was going into the next NOTAM that went out. I don't have snow tires on my airplane. Um, yeah, so yeah, it sort of woke me up to the fact that it could be subjective depending on the kind of airport that you're visiting. So the day of this accident, this will give you an idea of what they were seeing. Um, this is the airplane going missed. So you can see the visibility wasn't too bad once you got under the ceiling, 1,100 feet, but it was snowing, and it was moderate snow by the time they got there. And these two pictures are from me. This top one is one that's a few years old, going into Presque Isle, and this is with the lights supposedly turned on. You can't see the lights, and it's very difficult, and it can be even much worse than this, where you break out of the clouds and say, "There's no airport." And then you sort of begin to see the outlines of everything. And I was there January 8th, and it's over 7,000 feet. I used 6,000 feet to land. And I have anti-lock brakes in my plane, and they were firing off a lot. So it was not anything I hadn't seen before. Uh, Disconcerting to the person I had in the co-pilot seat. By the time I was ready to leave, this is what they had managed to get the taxiway to look like. The runway was a lot more covered than this. So again, it gets back to personal minimums, what you've been able to see, and how confident you are and how your plane performs in these kind of conditions. So this is the takeoff and landing performance initiative that happened after the Southwest airline. And this gets into the different states. And I don't know if you guys want to talk about the TALPA at all. One of you want to dive in?
Yeah, go ahead, Dan.
No, go for it.
All right. So this TALPA initiative came out of that Southwest flight in the early 2000s, and it was a group of pilots, FAA staff, airport operators that demonstrated that they could create some sort of a system that would provide a bit more of reliable information. So they created these classifications: dry, wet, contaminated, and the percentages were important. We talked about earlier with the percentage of the runway, especially if it's the shoulders versus the center, the keel of the runway. So the goal is to try to provide more information to be a bit more accurate and consistent, as opposed to those old braking action good, braking action fair reports that we had. And then that RCC, the Vicon RCCs that we talk about, roll into the rest of this and give us that accurate picture.
And today we've been focusing on contaminated, but wet runways are equally challenging because it's very hard to measure the depth of the water uniformly across the runways. And there's another one that is one of my favorites, which is slippery when wet. How do you guys report that?
There is a particular choice in the NOTAM manager for that, and there's criteria to establish it. I personally have not in my career had to issue that that particular NOTAM.
I think that's probably going to come up when you have a known issue with the runway. Surfaces are treated, and there's friction testing done to make sure that the treatment isn't reducing the friction too much, and likely that use will be if we have a runway that maybe is slipperier than it's supposed to be, given the surface treatment.
Yeah, I think one of the other ones that I've seen, I fly into Bangor a lot, and they have refueling Air Force planes there, and there's a section of the runway that's totally rubber covered. So as soon as it does get wet, you can sort of feel a different kind of event going on. And in the winter, also it's an issue. And I've had the same issue flying into Fort Lauderdale International during heavy rain on the main runway for the airlines, and you're just riding on rubber that happens to be wet. So, even though you may have good braking practice and be right on speeds, your plane may want to go off and do something else. And that's the only airport I've ever been shocked at was Fort Lauderdale with coming in on rubber section of the runway in heavy rain. So today we're focusing on winter, but wet can be equally important to stay on top of. So you heard the guys talking about RCAM. So do you want to take the lead and describe what RCAM is and how this may work?
I think boiled down, it's just a scoring system between 0 and 6 that utilizes the percentages and the contaminations, or in this case, if we're not considering wet contamination, but it utilizes those conditions based on that TALPA update. It still allows for some of the friction monitoring, but it's very specifically only allows us to downgrade, does not allow us to upgrade. So unfortunately, to Keith's point, we may have a great runway, but still not be able to upgrade it. So we develop the score by inputting what we're observing. We go out there on the runway and what type of snow do we have? Is it wet? Is it dry? Is it slush? And how much do we have in each third?
I was talking to Matt, who's the airport manager at Plymouth, and he mentioned that there are some ways that you don't have to use the automated system completely, that you can change if the braking is better than what this code is coming out to be, that there is a way to sort of upgrade it. And I don't know how often do you ever upgrade a code that the system is coming out with?
I can take that because it happens. We talk about it a lot here. Going back to that FICON with ICE 111 scenario and how dangerous it sounds. But yet we've gone out and we've done braking action reports. We use our decelerometer, and in order to upgrade, you need to have a mu or a reading above 40. And anything above 40 is more or less like just hitting a brick wall. I mean, 40 is braking good and better. So the likelihood of you getting braking over 40 in some sort of contaminant is very rare. But when you have that unique circumstance that I talked about with the ice, and you can get a braking above 40, you just get to bring it up to a 2. You don't get to go up all the way to a 6. So that would be far too confusing for a pilot to say that we're reporting ice, and then the braking action is really, really good with a 6. It doesn't work that way. So it's an imperfect system for sure.
But that's good to know. But I have, again, getting back to the point, I see lots of 5s and 3s, but not anything else. So,
and one of the reasons why, if you go back and look, is those 4s and 2s have to do with really cold temperatures or increased depth. And most airports don't have to deal with that. Although now we were wondering ourselves with these temperatures we've seen, should we be downgrading, those normal 5s to 4s because of the outside air temperature? So that's why you don't see them as much, but they are there for a reason.
And I scraped out of one of the RCAM documents this basic flow chart. We don't necessarily have to go over it, but we've been talking about that already. The type of contamination, where it is, and again, the system is now trying to automate that for you by giving you the number. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. Yep. We enter in a description based on what type of contaminant. We can put 2 contaminants per third of the runway, and the depth if it's applicable. So wet and compacted snow don't have depths, but everything else will have a depth. Most everything else, and it will assign a code using effectively the RCAM matrix, but it does it automated for us. Yep.
Here was the downgrade and upgrade section. I don't know if we were just going over that. So we're using the braking action, I guess, to decide whether to downgrade. But the upgrade, yeah, I couldn't see anyone upgrading it. Though Matt said at Plymouth they do it.
It it can come up when you have so grooved runways typically aren't all the way to the shoulders. So what I've found is that we'll have ice that'll or uh, contamination that will melt. It'll cool, not really cool, but it'll wet the sides of the runway. You'll have a perfectly bare center of the runway with more than 10% ice uh, because of the shoulders. So in this case, you could have what's effectively going to that middle portion of the runway, a perfect runway with a strip of ice on either side.
Yeah, I think I have a picture of one of those in here somewhere. So,
Which is really frustrating because otherwise it's a really good runway,
Mhm.
and the intersections are going to be fine, and you'll get to the taxiways. But if you're off the center, depending on what size runway you are, we had a 100-foot wide runway, but the shoulder 10 feet on either side, so you'd have an 80-foot wide perfect strip with ice on the sides. 80
right.
foot bigger than many airports runways. So
And Bangor is 150 feet wide, and there, depending on how it's been melting, you may land 30 feet off center just to stay in a section that doesn't have rubber on it. So, yeah. But again, that's all, us as pilots, we need to start developing this knowledge. Unfortunately, we just can't open a book and say, oh yeah, Bangor is going to be slippery in the first 1,000 feet always, or 2,000 feet. So, oh, here we go. Here's one which is got, for some reason, these strips these are where the tires are from landing us on the mains are very clear, but everything else is ice. So you guys went that you can have multiple contaminants and they can be layered contaminants. I did read somewhere that it's common for each third to have slightly different contaminant.
yeah, yeah, you may have snow on one end of the runway and dry on the other end.
That happens to us here at Hanscom Field a few times a year, depending on how quickly we can get to the snow removal on our secondary runway.
Yeah.
So we'll plow the intersection south, and then that'll end up dry, and we haven't gotten around to plowing the north side. And then when you do, and you're ready to open it, now it's a runway 23 with a 566, because the first third is 1/8 inch snow, and the rest of it's dry.
Also look at what do you have for topography around the airport. If you have wet areas like a swamp or a pond, we had one end of our runway would be slicker than the other. And oddly enough, just topography, we would have snow on one end and consistently no snow on the other.
Yeah.
Just that's just the way the weather worked for us.
So yeah, we just have to know that we can believe the numbers that are getting in there. So one of the other ones that I found interesting is you couldn't report mud or any of these items. So one of the things from personal experience is somebody I know was taxiing out of a Towered Airport on just a snowy, slushy day and cut the corner a little too much and got the main into the mud. And the mud was so thick the plane just sunk. So I mean, they were able to get it out with a tug, but the question is, how do you ever rate or come up with descriptions that, warn people that there's mud in the environment, even though it's off the surface that you normally should be taxiing on?
I've not personally had to issue any FICONs or NOTAMs related to these 4 items, and I believe that they're there for very specific sections of the country, certain unimproved strips, things like that. If we have a paved surface and we had the need to report that there's mud on it, rest assured that we're just going to close that surface and we're not going to tell you that it's open with mud on it.
Okay, that's good. So I did come up with some pictures for the different kinds of rankings there, just to make it kind of interesting. So the system's calling it dry snow, basically on the left, if you can squeeze it and it doesn't stick. And snow on the right is wet snow and you can make a snowman out of it. So I'm not sure. Do you think there's anything in between? But it seems pretty subjective to me.
I mean, there's going to be a little bit in between, but really, when you pick up the snow, it's either going to fall back apart with a gloved hand. You pick up the snow, it's going to fall apart, or it'll clump together. I mean,
I like the slush one as well. It seems to be varying degrees of slush. I found this middle picture, which was interesting. It shows, I think, that you can actually sink all the way through the slush, but it has a lot of friction. Um, and it can definitely be very hard to get through, which is hard for someone to realize landing a plane in slush until you do it. Um, it can have my first time landing at an airport that had not published a braking score of any type. Um, and it was white, but dark enough that I could tell where the runway was, and the lights were shining through the snow. So, and I normally would land in 1,500 to 2,000 feet, and I landed in less than 1,000 because it was like someone had put glue on my tires. It just stopped. Um, so yeah, slush is one of those things I don't think that gets enough attention.
yeah,
Um,
it'll reduce your FICON score real quick. It doesn't take a lot. It's just like having a water on the runway.
yeah, it's kind of interesting. The compacted snow, one of the things I think I found this picture as well. I wanted to make sure that I found one is these type of ruts can get really kind of rough and can make your landings sound worse than it really is because you might be getting pushed around a bit. But it's really typically uneventful, at least when I've gone through it, but it does look pretty bad. So Dan, you're up. I picked some fun recent NOTAMs from your environment and
Yeah, you can see the picture in the background here. These NOTAMs, I think, are from that storm. That pile is still out there, unfortunately. So looking at the first one, ILS unserviceable. So that we have a 6 to 8 inch limit of snow in front of our glide slope, and as soon as it gets above that, the my understanding is actually the glide FAA has it set up so that it will disable itself, but they will NOTAM it out of service until we clear the snow. And it's about the size of a football field that we have to clear of snow. We can't have snowbanks on the side, so they actually took a couple of days to clear that out. So the next one, so I'm not exactly sure what that one. Some of these
yeah,
are
I may have put the arrow in the wrong place. I think it was supposed to be pointing down to the apron.
the apron. Yep. So we clear the apron, but even with that, the loader that we use to clear the apron will compact the snow, and that will melt and refreeze, and it'll be patchy snow, and you may see later on it's patchy ice. Conveniently, it's the same apron that they de-ice on, so sometimes that helps us because then we get a little bit of a clear area. Doesn't always work, but sometimes it's nice by happenstance. So that just slowly improves, but it often is compacted right after a storm. Moving down, so that the snow piles, so you can see them right behind me. I think the system limits at 10 feet without doing a free form. It's at least 10 feet piles, but large snow. I think this last storm was 19 inches for us. Keith, you may have even gotten more out that way. But the snow's got to go somewhere. And right now it's sitting on the ramp. So we put up NOTAMs to let you know, be aware there are snow piles where you may be taxiing. To that end, I wanted to add a note that I used to work for Cape Air, and we taxied through a lot of Northeast airports, and we'd get safety reports. So, hey, the airport wasn't, it's fun seeing it from the other side now. Like the airport was in the middle of snow clearing, and there were snow piles on the taxiway. Sometimes those don't get reported because they're in the middle of clearing. So it's really important to understand that it's an active environment, and you may not see a NOTAM for snow piles because we're out there in the middle of clearing it, and we have to create the piles to move them. So just be looking out if it's actively snowing or if the snow hasn't been cleared yet, it's really hard to see a pile of white snow on a white surface or with snow falling. So go
Right.
slow and keep an eye out. And talk to us on the radio or to if there's tower, ask what's going on. We're there. Just let us know you're coming. um, the bottom ones. Okay, so taxiway. Yep. So when we get all of our surfaces cleared up, we try not to overload the NOTAM list with every little taxiway that's different. If they're pretty close to each other, and we can say, yep, they're all patchy, compacted, or we'll try to simplify that down to all. All the taxiways are patchy, compacted. If we have a difference, you may see an outlier called out specifically. So we'll say all of them are patchy, compacted. Taxiway Bravo has a 1/4 inch dry snow, something like that. So we try to make it as straightforward without having a ton to look at because mixed in with all the cranes and everything else, I'm sure we all love looking through the list of NOTAMs. What do we got here? Runway 2, FICON, compacted. So immediately after the storm, I mean, this was a pretty big storm, so we did have some compacted snow on the runway. Unfortunately, creating windrows to snow blow sometimes creates compacted snow. So you can see kind of across the board. This was a couple of days after our storm, I think, or maybe a day or two after. We did end up with some compaction. This one doesn't show a FICON because it's 10%. So we don't have the 25, but we are reporting what's out there. Conveniently, once that 10% is gone, you won't see a FICON at all. And then the airport surface condition is not reported daily. Unfortunately, our chart supplement doesn't say this, and we used to be a little more active with the Guard here and their mission. So we had a lot more activity and oversight of the airfield conditions all day and night. That's changed a little bit here. So I wanted to make sure that we communicated that we're not here middle of the night and do not expect necessarily that we will notice a storm roll through in the middle of the night and have a NOTAM up to let you know that there's a 1/2 inch of snow on the runway.
Right.
We try to keep an eye on it, but sometimes it sneaks up on us.
So I'm going to do a time check here. We've actually blown through an hour. So we've got 3 minutes to go. Just want to check real quick to see if there's any questions we should be trying to get to.
No, we're doing a good job answering them and sharing links.
Hey, that's great, Carly. Thanks so much. So Keith, I may skip over you. That's
Sure.
okay.
That's fine.
Kind of more of the same. And I wanted to wrap this particular crash up really quickly because there are some really good lessons learned in it, and you can also just look it up on the web if you want. But about everything that could go wrong went wrong on this. So there was report of 3 to 3 1/4 inch of dry snow, which may have been worse because it was contradicted by someone else saying that it was less. And one report had said 100% of the pavement was covered, and then another one reported that 20 to 25% of the pavement was visible. As you could see from the picture I showed you earlier, it's very easy for that runway environment to look just white, and you can't see the lights even when they're on high. This particular crew had tried to do one approach. They couldn't see the runway, they went missed. What they didn't know is on there that there was another problem, which I'll get to in a second here. So they went around, they were talking to ops, making all their position reports on the ILS coming in. So ops knew that to get off the runway. They made sure that their lights were on bright to make sure they had a chance of seeing the runway, but the ops guys didn't tell them whether they could see the lights or not. And as a pilot, I would have liked to have known if they couldn't see the lights that the lights weren't going to be visible, probably to me coming in. So on their second go around, there was some confusion on the deck about whether they had the runway environment in sight or not. They didn't decide to try to go around quick enough, and they ended up landing in the grass between a taxiway and the runway. And it turned out that there was a localizer misalignment, um, which had been reported only once. And apparently you need to report things twice for it to trigger an FAA inspection. And there's no way for the airport staff to monitor that. So this crew thought that the FMS, which is GPS guidance, and the ILS were lining up, which they couldn't have been. And in this particular case, also the first officer had not gotten enough sleep. So they both assumed that everything was good and that they thought that they saw the runway, but they clearly didn't. So the weather again at the time was 1100, which is pretty common up there for an approach, but moderate snow and freezing fog and visibility limits. So good news is there was only 3 minor injuries in this. And getting back to glide slope, do you want to explain this, Keith, real quick before we're a minute over? This was the ILS glide slope.
Yeah, that's the localizer antenna. It's half of the ILS system. It provides you with your lateral guidance. And some of them are out in the grass and they're going to be snow covered.
Right.
Those particular arrays, as long as they're not covered, then they'll still work. It's the glide slope antenna that you really want to be careful about and make sure that you're protecting that critical area.
Right. So in this case, the FAA came back and said that they had to clear this in the future. And this is where on their first approach, they clipped off the top of the weather antenna, but didn't realize they clipped it. And so there was some changes that came out in some advisory. Again, if you look this up on the web, you'll be able to find all the things that they changed as a result of this. But the first officer had been in a crew that had noticed the localizer anomaly and hadn't reported it because they thought it had already been reported. So again, people are, we all, whenever we note any kind of anomaly on an approach, we should be calling it out to someone so that they know to actually check it instead of thinking that it's us. We went over the conditions not monitored. That's very important, especially at a lot of the rural airports, but even some of the larger airports. And even places like LaGuardia will have times when they're not monitored. And here's the 5 scenarios. Again, we're not going to get a chance to go into them in much depth. If there's interest, maybe we'll continue this next month and just keep going through winter scenarios. But I'll do this really quick one. Bangor. I think I may have reviewed this one before. This is a video going into Bangor. And this was reported as 333. A lot of rubber on the runway. But as getting back to Dan's point, the center was much more clear than the sides. So it looked very, very clear. But as soon as I got off the taxiway, I was in fog and I could not see where to taxi. I saw no taxi lights. I mean, no taxi lights, no taxiway markings, nothing. And I decided just to stop instead of making it worse. And they sent out a follow me truck to get me in. And by the time I was ready to leave, which was at the bottom picture, it's perfectly clear. So again, no NOTAM necessarily for that. And the only FICOM NOTAM was actually from the day before. And because I was so early getting in, they had not done updated NOTAMs for that day yet. So again, be on your game. Everybody can do this. You just need to develop what your comfort zone is, and really get to know your airplane. I think that's it. So thanks everyone for coming to these, and please send me any suggestions or scenarios you might or topics that you might like to see going forward. It's a lot of fun to be working with people that are interested in safety. And again, hope your winter is also going well. And Keith and Dan, thanks so much for providing expert insights. Any questions, Carly or Melanie or anybody else?
No, we got everything answered. I dropped a link in the chat for everybody to see the links that you provided so that they could check it out on the document. And we were answering questions as we go. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Keith. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank
Sounds
you,
good.
everybody. Yeah, and we'll get those credits issued within a couple days. Okay.
Great.
Awesome. Thanks again, guys. Take care.
See you next month.
Bye.